Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to tackle a relationship that, well, it really continues to shape global security. We're talking about India and Pakistan. That recent military clash in 2025 started by that awful terrorist attack in Indian-controlled Kashmir. It's just thrown this whole complex rivalry back into the spotlight, hasn't it?
It really has. Exactly. And for you listening in, our goal here in this deep dive is to, get past the headlines. We want to understand the deep historical roots, the changing military situation, and really the core reasons for this ongoing tension.
Right.
We want to give you clarity, but without getting totally bogged down in every single detail, we'll be looking at reports on the 2025 conflict, obviously, but also a wider view of the India-Pakistan dynamic.
Okay.
And what's really jumped out from these sources, actually, is this big change. A massive shift in who's supplying arms to both India and Pakistan. And that shift, it tells us a lot, I think, about the changing global power games in that region.
Okay, let's definitely unpack that because that arms supplier thing sounds, really pivotal. But maybe to get the full picture, we need to rewind a bit first. Look at how this whole thing started.
Good idea.
I mean, the partition of British India back in '47, creating India and Pakistan,
Yeah.
that was just, well, a cataclysm.
Oh, absolutely. A deeply, deeply traumatic split. You get two new nations, Hindu-majority India, Muslim-majority Pakistan.
Yeah.
And it sparked these mass migrations, just unimaginable scale. And along with the migrations came just brutal communal violence. Estimates vary, but maybe possibly up to 1 million people died. That bitterness, that mistrust, it's still there, casting a long shadow.
And it wasn't just the dividing line on the map, was it? There are these issues kind of baked in from the start.
Precisely, yeah. Like the status of the princely states. Some hadn't joined either side immediately, and the big one, of course, was Jammu and Kashmir,
Right.
Muslim majority, but ruled by a Hindu Maharaja who, well, he hesitated. And that created this immediate power vacuum, competing claims. And it lit the fuse for conflict almost straight away.
So diplomacy never really had a chance to take root properly.
Well, diplomatic ties were established, but they were always fragile, always overshadowed by the partition trauma and these land disputes, especially Kashmir. Kashmir became this, de facto border, this line of control constantly simmering.
Which brings us straight to the actual wars. Kashmir, like you said, was the first big one, 1947-48.
Yep. Pakistan supported a tribal invasion, hoping to take control. The Maharaja then decided to join India. India sent troops in. Eventually, the UN brokered a ceasefire, but crucially, it cemented the division of Kashmir along that line of control.
A division that's still the core problem today.
Exactly.
And sadly, it didn't stop there. 1965, another war, again, about Kashmir.
Indeed. Pakistan tried something called Operation Gibraltar, basically trying to stir up trouble inside Indian-administered Kashmir. It blew up into a full-scale war.
And again, a ceasefire, but no real resolution.
Same pattern. UN steps in, fighting stops, but the underlying issues still there, untouched.
Then 1971 is a bit different, the Bangladesh Liberation War. That feels like it really changed the whole chessboard in South Asia.
Oh, fundamentally. India intervened decisively to support the Bengali movement in what was then East Pakistan. Result, Bangladesh was born.
So not directly about Kashmir, but a huge strategic shift.
A massive strategic victory for India. It definitely altered the power balance.
But even after that massive upheaval, we still see things flare up. Kargil, 1999, that showed how dangerous things could still get.
Absolutely. Pakistani forces crossing the line of control into the Kargil area.
Yeah.
It just highlighted again how fragile things were. India eventually pushed them back, won militarily, but again,
No lasting peace.
no lasting solution. And look, beyond these major wars, you've had constant friction. The Siachen Glacier conflict, that huge military standoff after the 2001 Indian Parliament attack, the awful Mumbai attacks in 2008.
Right.
All these kept tensions incredibly high. And now this 2025 conflict, sparked by that terrible terrorist attack, it's just the latest, chapter in this long, troubled history.
Okay, so a history of repeated, dangerous conflict. And then you layer on top of that the nuclear weapons.
Right, that's the other massive factor. You just can't talk about India and Pakistan now without talking about the nuclear dimension.
India tested first, 74, wasn't it? Smiling Buddha. Then again in 98.
That's right. India's program, figures like Homi Bhabha were pioneers, and Indira Gandhi was PM for the first test. It culminated in those 98 tests, Operation Shakti. And Pakistan, well, they saw that and felt they absolutely had to match it, restore the balance.
So they tested very soon after, in 98 as well.
They did. Figures like Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had pushed for it earlier. A.Q. Khan was key in the development. They conducted their own tests, Chagai Roast, Chagai II. Suddenly, both are declared nuclear powers.
Which brings in this terrifying concept of mutually assured destruction, MAD. This idea that if one side uses nukes, the other retaliates, and it's just catastrophe for everyone.
It's a horrifying logic, isn't it? It's supposed to deter. The idea is that a big nuclear war is basically suicide for both sides.
But the world wasn't exactly thrilled when they both tested.
No. Widespread condemnation. Sanctions were imposed. Everyone was worried about proliferation. But it begs the question, right? How do you manage such a tense rivalry when both sides have the ultimate weapon?
Yeah. That risk of miscalculation or a conventional fight spiraling out of control.
Yeah.
Or even someone using a smaller tactical nuke.
It's a constant worry, a deeply concerning possibility. And this actually leads us perfectly into that really significant shift you mentioned earlier, the changing military alliances. This is where it gets really interesting now.
Okay, yeah, let's dive into that.
So for a long time, think Cold War era and even after, India leaned heavily on the Soviet Union and then Russia for its weapons.
Right.
I mean, figures from the mid-2000s suggest something like, what, nearly 80% of India's military kit was Russian?
Wow, that's huge. And Pakistan, a different story.
Very different. Pakistan became a close ally of the U.S., especially, you mentioned it earlier, during the Soviet-Afghan War in the 80s, and then again after 9/11 in the War on Terror.
So the U.S. was their main supplier for a long time.
For a key period, yes. The U.S. was the top supplier. China was always important, number two. But the U.S. was primary. Think F-16s, that kind of crucial hardware came from the U.S.
Okay, but that's the picture that's changed dramatically lately, right?
Dramatically. India's really ramped up buying arms from the U.S. and also other Western countries like France, Israel.
How much are we talking?
Now it's over half. Over 50% of India's arms imports are from the West. And Russia's share dropped significantly, down to around maybe 38%.
That is a huge shift. So India's moving away from that old non-aligned idea in a way.
In some ways, yes. It's definitely aligning its security shopping list, maybe even its broader interests, much more closely with the U.S. and its allies. And at the same time, the U.S.-Pakistan relationship has cooled off quite a bit.
Right. And you mentioned things like missile defense systems, India getting those from Israel, for instance. Pakistan might see that differently.
Well, potentially, yes. From Pakistan's perspective, advanced missile defense could look like India trying to negate Pakistan's nuclear deterrent, maybe allowing India a freer hand offensively. This might make Pakistan feel they need to rely more on, say, tactical nuclear weapons.
Ah, the smaller battlefield ones.
Exactly, which carry their own, perhaps more immediate risks of actually being used and escalating things compared to the big strategic ones meant purely for deterrence.
Okay, so while India pivots west, Pakistan's gone the other way.
Towards China.
Massively, yeah. We're talking something like 80% of Pakistan's military purchases now coming from China.
80%?
Yeah. Huge increase, and a big drop in stuff bought from the U.S. or Europe.
So what does this mean geopolitically?
Well, it's profound. There was a quote from Ashley Tellis. He put it really well. The U.S. is now central to India's security interests, while China increasingly plays a comparable role in Pakistan.
Wow.
So you basically have the big superpower rivalries, U.S. versus China, getting injected directly into the India-Pakistan conflict because the U.S. sees India as a counterweight to China.
Right, in the Indo-Pacific strategy. And as India gets closer to the U.S., China naturally doubles down on its support for Pakistan, its ironclad friend.
And it's not just about who sells weapons, is it? India and China have their own border tensions flaring up.
Exactly. That adds another layer of complexity.
Yeah.
Their own relationship is strained over territory. And then you have the wider U.S.-China tensions humming in the background, too.
It's like this incredibly tangled web.
It really is. And Lindsay Ford made this point. A future India-Pakistan war could literally see India using mostly American and European gear, while Pakistan uses mostly Chinese gear. These new, closer security partnerships are a critical new factor.
Okay, so let's bring this back to the 2025 conflict. We know that even in 2019, during that earlier flare-up, U.S. officials were worried enough about nuclear use to be on high alert.
Oh, yes. Secretary Pompeo talked about that later, how worried they were about escalation back then. And this time, in 2025, with these alliances even more starkly defined, that uncertainty, that strategic ambiguity, it's arguably even greater.
And India's military response after the 2025 attack, it seemed like the international reaction, initially at least, was a bit different this time.
Well, the Trump administration came out with quite strong public statements supporting India, and some observers in New Delhi apparently read that as maybe a sort of implicit green light for retaliation.
Even if, behind the scenes, the U.S. was probably saying, take it easy.
Likely urging restraint, yes, but the public messaging was strong.
And what about Russia, India's old partner?
That was quite noticeable, actually. In the immediate aftermath of the 2025 clashes, there wasn't much loud public communication from Moscow to New Delhi, especially compared to how quickly the U.S. and other Western countries reached out.
A sign of those shifting dynamics you mentioned.
Definitely seemed like it. And conversely, China. They were very quick, very public, very strong in backing Pakistan, reaffirming that ironclad friendship.
It really drives home how those old Cold War alignments are just gone, replaced by something new, maybe more complicated, maybe more dangerous.
I think that's fair to say. It's a new strategic landscape.
But it's not just these big geopolitical shifts, is it? There are things inside India and Pakistan, too, driving the tension.
Absolutely. You can't ignore the internal factors. Hypernationalism, for example, it's on the rise in both countries.
And that makes things riskier.
It can, yeah. Leaders might feel pressured by public opinion, by nationalist sentiment, to act tough, maybe take risks they otherwise wouldn't. It increases the chance of mistakes, of miscalculation, of things escalating unintentionally because domestic politics demands a strong response.
Like maybe the 2019 incident, that downing of the Indian jet by a Pakistani F-16.
Exactly. That whole episode, the airstrikes, the dogfight, the downed plane, showed how quickly things can spiral. And then there was the argument over the F-16s themselves.
Right. India saying the U.S. sold them to Pakistan only for counterterrorism.
Even though reports suggest the U.S. probably knew Pakistan intended them for broader defense against India, it just highlighted the potential for misunderstanding, for escalation driven by that nationalistic heat.
And since 2019, India's clearly been trying to upgrade its military.
Definitely a push towards modernization. They seem very aware of the changing threats and the need to keep up.
Okay, but look, it can't all be conflict and tension, can it? I mean, surely there are some connections, some, I don't know, positive links between India and Pakistan.
That's actually a really crucial point.
Yes.
Despite everything, the politics, the wars, there's a shared cultural heritage. You hear it in the languages, right? Hindi and Urdu are so similar. Yeah. Punjabi, Sindhi spoken across the border.
And Bollywood?
Bollywood is huge. Films starring actors like Shah Rukh Khan, they're often massive hits in Pakistan. Cuisine is similar. Some festivals are shared. It's a reminder of a common past, cultural links that politics hasn't completely erased.
And haven't there been moments, maybe rare, but moments of cooperation, like during natural disasters?
Yes, exactly. After the Gujarat earthquake in 2001, Pakistan offered aid. After the Pakistan earthquake in 2005, India offered aid. It shows that sometimes basic humanity can cut through the politics. We've also seen things like prisoner exchanges, gestures of goodwill, and of course, cricket diplomacy.
Ah, yes, cricket. Both a battleground and a bridge sometimes.
It got that unique power, hasn't it? The passion is so intense on both sides. Sometimes they try to use it to thaw relations, open dialogue.
It's fascinating. And you mentioned something else, the role of humor, how people actually deal with this online.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. People in both countries use humor, memes, social media. It's a way to process the tension, maybe highlight shared cultural things, or even just point out the absurdity of it all sometimes.
Like a coping mechanism.
Perhaps. Obviously, you don't want to trivialize the real dangers, the human cost. But it does offer this kind of unique window into how ordinary people navigate living next to this ongoing rivalry.
And of course, officially, there have been attempts at peace over the years. Lots of them.
Oh, and numerous diplomatic efforts. You had the Shimla Agreement back in '72, the Lahore Summit in '99, Agra Summit in 2001, plus international mediation, track 2 diplomacy with non-government people involved.
But nothing's really stuck long term.
No. The deep mistrust, the fundamentally opposed national interests, particularly over Kashmir, they've always proven incredibly difficult obstacles.
And right now, where do things stand diplomatically? Pretty frosty.
Very frosty, yeah. Trade is mostly suspended. Official diplomatic contact is minimal. We've even seen agreements like the Indus Waters Treaty being suspended, diplomats expelled. It's a real deep freeze.
And public opinion isn't helping.
Unfortunately, no. Public opinion in both countries tends to be quite negative towards the other, often shaped by those nationalist narratives and historical grievances we talked about. It makes it really hard for leaders to make any big diplomatic moves right now.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. What we're seeing is this incredibly deep-rooted, complex rivalry between India and Pakistan, always there, always simmering, and always now with the shadow of nuclear weapons. And what's become really clear, especially recently, is how much shifting global alliances are now feeding into this, influencing it. That 2025 escalation really highlighted the ongoing dangers and, increasingly, the role these external powers are playing.
Exactly. You, listening, should now have, hopefully, a much better grasp of the history behind all this, why these changing military partnerships matter so much, and just how delicate that strategic balance is in this nuclear region.
Right. Which leaves us with a final thought, something for you to chew on. Given that both India and Pakistan are now more closely aligned with these big global powers, how might future conflicts between them actually look different from the wars of the past? What could that mean for stability, not just in the region, but maybe internationally? And, what responsibility do countries like the U.S. and China have? Are they helping to calm things down, or are they maybe making these old tensions even worse?
A lot to think about there.
Definitely something to keep in mind. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.